Hey guys, tonight we're going back to the Stone Age, a time when clothing was made of whatever you didn't starve to death trying to catch and much more. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Straight into a world where everything is sharp, cold, hungry, or on fire. Sometimes, all at once. You've survived the night. Barely. And only because nothing hungry stumbled into your cave while you were snoring like a mammoth with sinus problems. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're in the Stone Age. Your bed is a rock. Not like a firm mattress kind of rock. A literal slab of nature that's done nothing to accommodate your spine. If you're lucky, there's a layer of fur between you and hypothermia, probably from some unfortunate animal you didn't kill, but are now wearing like you did. It still smells like regret. You try to sit up, but your joints crack loud enough to wake a saber-toothed tiger, or at least earn a disapproving grunt from the person squatting next to you, sharpening a bone knife and looking very done with your existence. The air is cold, not charming winter walk cold. It's, I can see my breath, and maybe part of my soul, cold. There is no fire, just the smouldering remains of what might have once been warmth, now reduced to smoke, ash, and shame. Outside, the sun hasn't even risen yet, probably because it doesn't want to. The tribe is already awake, moving around like this is normal, like waking up before dawn to gather rocks and not die is a totally reasonable lifestyle. You, on the other hand, look like someone dropped a confused poet into a survival contest. You have no idea what you're supposed to do, and frankly, neither does anyone else. But they're better at pretending. You stretch. Bad idea. You're sore in places you didn't know existed. Your shoulder clicks, your back spasms, and your hips issue a formal protest. There is no breakfast waiting, no gentle conversation, no coffee. Just the cold realization that if you don't immediately start doing something useful, anything, you might get left behind, or worse, eaten after you die, for convenience. And that's how your morning begins. You're hungry. Not just, I could eat, hungry. This is the kind of hunger where your stomach starts having conversations with itself, and none of them are friendly. You look around, expecting maybe a handful of berries, or even a sad strip of dried meat. There is nothing. Breakfast, in the Stone Age, is not a guaranteed daily ritual. It is a hypothetical, a hope, a whispered prayer to an uncaring sky god who may or may not be a large rock with a face someone carved in during a fever dream. If you want to eat, you have to earn it. That means digging, scraping, scavenging, or sprinting after something faster than you and hoping it's dumber. Spoiler, it isn't. Everything you want to eat either has legs or thorns, and in both cases, it uses them against you. You watch as a wiry man gnaws on a root that looks like something you'd avoid even touching. He offers you a piece. It tastes like wet wood that lost a bet, but it fills your mouth, and more importantly, it doesn't actively try to kill you. A rare win. Someone else holds up a dead bird like they just discovered gold. It's about the size of your hand, mostly feathers and nerves. They start plucking it with the efficiency of someone who's done this a lot, which is comforting until you realize they're keeping the whole thing. Apparently, catching food means you get to eat it. What a concept. You consider foraging. After all, how hard could it be to spot something edible? Very, it turns out. Every fruit looks either suspiciously bright or aggressively bland. You pluck something that looks vaguely like a plum. A woman slaps it out of your hand before you can taste it. She doesn't say anything, just gives you a look that says, I've seen people drop dead faster than that. So you settle for chewing on a piece of old root and pretending it's enough. It isn't. Your stomach isn't fooled. It begins planning your betrayal. You're fasting. Permanently. if you're not careful. You want to be helpful. That's cute. The tribe is already busy. Someone's sharpening a flint blade. Someone else is weaving sinew into something that might be a net or a trap, or just a creative way to make you feel unskilled. You pick up a rock. You stare at it. It stares back. Congratulations, you're bonding with a rock. Tools are not decorations here. They're the reason anyone has teeth left. They cut, scrape, smash, dig, and occasionally get used to settle arguments. And unless you've spent years figuring out which stone breaks into blades and which one just breaks your thumb, you're about as useful as a damp leaf. You try to copy what the others are doing. A man smacks two stones together and produces a razor-sharp edge in 3 swings. You try the same. The rock splits unevenly and flings a shard directly into your face. You're bleeding now, but hey, you've successfully recreated the experience of early surgery. A woman is making cord from strips of hide. She does it with the efficiency of someone who's been doing this since her literal infancy. You attempt the same. The hide slips, coils, and somehow ties your fingers together. You've invented Stone Age handcuffs. That's something? No one explains anything. They don't need to. Tools are so essential, they're treated like breathing. Expected, obvious, and really noticeable when you're bad at it. And you're bad at it. You sit down with your 2 rocks and attempt a new strategy, staring until inspiration strikes. It doesn't. What strikes is another flake of stone, right into your lap. You pretend it was intentional. No one buys it. Eventually, someone takes pity and hands you a half-finished scraper, not out of kindness, but because watching you fail is slowing everyone down. You nod gratefully and then hold it the wrong way. They shake their head and go back to work. It's getting colder. Again. Which is impressive, considering you didn't think colder was still an option. Your fingers are stiff, your nose has stopped issuing temperature updates, and your feet are starting to feel like someone else's problem. You decide it's time to make fire. After all, how hard can it be? You've seen it done. In drawings. And dreams. Step 1. Gather dry wood. You don't find dry wood. Everything's damp, stubborn, and covered in something that may or may not be alive. You pick the least suspicious bundle and hope for the best. Step 2. Friction. You rub sticks together. Nothing happens. You rub harder. Still nothing. Eventually you create heat, then smoke, and then more smoke. It's just enough to burn your eyes and give you false hope. Then the wind shows up and mocks your efforts by blowing it all away. You keep going. By now your hands are blistered, your arms ache, and your confidence has quietly left the camp without saying goodbye. You glance over. One of the elders has a fire going already. No ceremony, no drama, just a small, perfect flame nestled in a pile of dry moss like it was born there. You look back at your pile. It looks like it's been cursed. Eventually, someone notices. They walk over, silently take your kindling, rearrange it with the efficiency of a bored god, and strike 2 rocks together with a flint edge. Sparks, smoke, flame. Done. They hand it to you without a word, and walk off before you can say thank you or teach me your dark magic. You stare at the fire, now burning in your pile. You pretend it was your idea. No one believes you. Fire is everything. Warmth, light, safety, cooked food, and the only reason predators haven't dragged you off into the night. But it's not easy. It never was. Every flame is a battle, and you just lost 5 of them in a row. You're thirsty. Deep, dry, mouth-like sandpaper thirsty. The kind of thirsty that makes you consider licking moss or chewing bark just to feel something wet. Luckily, there's a stream nearby. You stumble toward it like a man possessed. Finally, something easy. You kneel, cup your hands, and scoop up a glorious handful of crystal clear water. You drink. And then, you pause. That water had a taste. Not a flavor. A message. It whispered something metallic and vaguely threatening. A few seconds later, your stomach replies with a gurgle that sounds like it's filing a complaint. Here's the thing. In the Stone Age, water is not clean or filtered. It's not lovingly piped from snowmelt through a mountain spring. It's a wild, communal soup. Animals drink from it. People bathe in it. Sometimes things die in it. Sometimes people drink it after things die in it. There is no quality control. There is only risk. You look around for signs, any sign, that this water is safe. No one else is drinking. That might be a clue. One of the elders is boiling something over a fire. Smart. You didn't do that. You drank straight from the source like it owed you something. A small child walks by and hands you a hollowed-out gourd of water. It's warm, smells faintly like dirt, and still looks safer than whatever just settled in your lower intestine. But there's no other option. You're in the middle of a society that hasn't discovered plumbing, filtration, or even consistent advice on which puddles won't end your week. Thirst is constant and water is everywhere, just inconveniently weaponized. You hear a story, half-whispered, about a man who drank from the wrong bend in the river and didn't make it to morning. You nod, slowly, trying to commit the story to memory, while also pretending you didn't just do the exact same thing. Now it's a waiting game. Will you hydrate and feel better? Or are you about to spend the next 12 hours regretting your entire tongue's decision-making process? You've decided to join the hunt. Bold, brave, doomed. You're handed a spear. It's heavy, uneven, and smells like the last thing it was jammed into. Probably something with tusks. The others check their gear calmly, like they're just going out to pick up groceries. If groceries actively tried to impale you. You follow the group into the woods. The air is quiet. Too quiet. You assume this is good. It's not. The silence means every animal within a mile knows you're here and has decided it doesn't want to be. Eventually, someone spots something. A wild boar. It's massive. It looks like it bench presses logs for fun. You raise your spear. Your hand is shaking. Your confidence is even shakier. The boar looks up. You freeze. The boar doesn't. It charges. You run. That's it. That's your strategy. You sprint through the trees, trip over a root and eat dirt. Not a metaphor, actual dirt. It tastes as inspiring as your performance. Behind you, the real hunters are moving with precision. One darts left, another flanks from the side. Spears fly. The boar goes down. The tribe cheers. You are still on the ground, rethinking your entire identity. They drag the carcass back to camp. It takes 4 people and a lot of grunting. You limp behind them, trying to look like you helped. You didn't. Back at the fire, they butcher the animal with stone knives and practiced hands. You get handed a strip of raw meat. You chew it like someone trying to understand how flavor works. It's chewy, slightly warm, and weirdly emotional. This was supposed to be your moment, your heroic breakthrough. But the truth is, in the Stone Age, hunting is not cinematic. It's exhausting. It's dangerous. And most of the time, you don't get the animal. The animal gets you. You've learned something important today. You are not the apex predator. You're the guy who clogs up the hunting party and almost gets gored to death by an angry pig. After almost getting trampled to death by an overgrown pork missile, you decide to try something safer, plants. How hard could foraging be? You've seen leaves. You've even touched a mushroom once. You're basically an herbalist. You head out with a small woven pouch and boundless optimism. 2 things that historically get people killed. Within minutes, you've found something that looks promising. A berry bush. The berries are small, shiny, and vividly coloured, which is either a sign of nutrition or a blaring biological warning siren. You grab one. Just as you're about to pop it into your mouth, a nearby woman swats your hand away like she's saving your life. Which, to be fair, she is. No one explains anything. They don't have to. You're supposed to know what's edible and what's fatal. And if you don't, well, the tribe gets 1 story richer. You move on. Dig up a few tubers. Try to act like you know what you're doing. You even sniff a mushroom with scholarly curiosity before tossing it, remembering that fungi in this world are less side dish and more hallucinate into the void before dying under a fern. A man shows you something that looks like a shriveled brown carrot. He nods. You nod back, as if you knew this plant personally. You chew a piece. It tastes like soil and regret, but you're not dead yet, which qualifies as success. The truth is, plants are the real gatekeepers of survival. They don't run, they don't bite. They just sit there quietly, waiting for you to make a mistake. One bite of the wrong leaf, and it's a race between vomiting and your nervous system shutting down. And even the edible ones are work. Some roots need boiling, some leaves need drying, some seeds will kill you if you forget to roast them first. There are no shortcuts, only symptoms. By the time you return to camp, you've gathered 2 vaguely safe tubers, a few edible flowers, and a newfound respect for herbal knowledge you absolutely do not possess. Let's talk about what you're wearing, or rather, what you've been wrapped in like a poorly packed meatloaf. Your outfit consists of animal hides that were scraped clean with a rock, dried over smoke, and stitched together with a technique best described as functional but vaguely insulting. It doesn't fit. It doesn't breathe. It smells like something that was recently alive and still might be. There are no sleeves, just holes where your arms are expected to exit. The garment itself is stiff in places it shouldn't be, loose in places it really shouldn't be, and generally designed by someone whose only fashion goal was, don't die today. You tug at the edges, trying to adjust it. Bad idea. The seams made of dried sinew respond by digging deeper into your skin. Now you're chafing. Congratulations. In the Stone Age, clothing comes with side effects. Nearby, a woman is softening a new hide by chewing it. Yes, chewing it. This is considered normal. You briefly wonder how desperate someone had to be to discover that teeth were a viable tailoring tool. You try to look dignified. It's hard. Your fur tunic flaps weirdly when you move. Your boots are 2 mismatched scraps tied together with strips of gut, and your inner thighs are now at war with your outer thighs over territory. Then there's the temperature. Somehow, your hide outfit manages to be too warm and too cold at the same time. The fur traps heat around your torso, making you sweat, while your limbs dangle freely in the wind like sacrifices to the frost gods. And don't even ask about rain. Hides get wet. Wet hides get heavy. And suddenly, you're walking around wrapped in a soggy animal sponge that slowly reanimates as it drips down your back. Meanwhile, the rest of the tribe looks perfectly at ease in their handmade gear. Their clothes move with them. Yours moves against you, like it resents being worn by someone this incompetent. You think the tribe likes you. That's adorable. You've been here a day, maybe 2. You haven't actively endangered anyone, yet. And you're trying your best, which in Stone Age terms still ranks just below dead weight and just above animal bait. Nobody says it out loud, of course. That would be effort. But the signs are there. When the group sits around the fire, they sit slightly closer to each other, leaving you a generous 4-foot buffer zone like you're contagious, which, considering you drank from the wrong stream, might be accurate. Social status here is based on one simple metric: usefulness. Can you hunt? Can you gather? Can you not scream when insects crawl up your leg? No? Then congratulations, you're not part of the inner circle. You're more of a temporary guest, a very flammable one. You try to contribute. You offer a root. It's the wrong root. You try to help tan a hide. You poke a hole straight through it. Someone hands you a bundle of sticks and gestures vaguely toward the fire. You stand there holding it like you're about to invent performance art. They stop asking you to help. At one point, a child offers you a sharp rock. You assume it's a gift? It isn't. It's a test. You fail it by holding the blade upside down and bleeding onto your own foot. No one reacts. That's the worst part. No one mocks you. They just move on. Like nature. Like weather. You're not worth getting angry about. Yet. You overhear someone grunt in your direction. It's a tone you don't understand, but you feel it in your bones. Not threatening. Not friendly. Just observational. The same way someone might comment on a log that's not burning properly. You are the log. And you start to wonder if the wolves would be a more forgiving audience. There's no lantern, no torch, no warm glow from a bedside table lamp. The sun drops behind the horizon like a guillotine, and just like that, the world turns black. Not dim, not cozy. Black. The fire crackles, casting a flickering circle of light that somehow makes everything just visible enough to be more terrifying. Trees rustle in the distance. Something howls. It's either a wolf or something that eats wolves. Either way, it knows where you are. It's been waiting for you to fall asleep. You scoot closer to the fire. No one joins you. Most of the tribe is already curled up together in a pile of hides, forming a warm, collective mass of mutual trust and shared body heat. You're not invited. You're the one who sneezed during the hunting party and scared off a deer. You get the cold side of the cave. Sleep doesn't come easy. Every sound outside the fire's glow sounds like it has an agenda. A twig snaps. You sit up. A branch creaks. You stop breathing. Something snorts, or maybe exhales, from behind the rock wall. You make peace with your gods. You don't know their names, but you figure they'll understand. Even the stars look like they're judging you. Beautiful, yes, but useless. You can't eat them, can't wear them, and they won't scare off whatever just moved near the cave entrance. You close your eyes, you open them again almost immediately. Your brain reminds you that you're wrapped in a damp fur coat and lying on a slab of uneven earth, surrounded by people who may or may not notice if you get dragged away in the night. And here's the thing, if something does eat you, it won't be out of malice. It'll be out of efficiency. You're slow, you're weak, and judging by the way you failed to cook that root earlier, you probably smell like panic. You wake up sore, stiff, and somehow colder than when you fell asleep, which shouldn't be possible, but the Stone Age enjoys new forms of suffering. Your fur wrap has shifted in the night, offering little more than emotional support. Your ankle feels like it lost a fight with a rock, and there's a new bite on your arm. Could be a bug, could be a rodent. Honestly, you're just glad something found you useful. Outside the cave, the tribe is already up. Again, you don't know when they sleep. Maybe they don't. Maybe exhaustion is just something they wrestle into submission, like everything else in their lives. You hobble toward the fire pit, hoping for something warm. There isn't. The ashes are cold. The fire went out sometime during the night. A group decision, apparently, that didn't involve consulting you or your fingers, which are now numb enough to qualify as decorative. You attempt to rejoin the group. Someone hands you a stick. No instructions, no explanation. You assume it's for poking something. Maybe a task. Maybe self-defense. Maybe they're just testing to see what you'll do with it. You fail, obviously. Every movement hurts. Your muscles ache from doing things they weren't designed for. Namely, survival. Your shoulders scream from carrying too little, too wrong. Your knees feel like someone filled them with gravel. Your pride? Somewhere back near the pile of uncooked tubers you tripped over yesterday. The others are already organising. Someone's reinforcing the shelter wall with bones. Another's gutting something with terrifying ease. You try to help again, and manage to trip over a child's toy, which is literally just a small rock with a face on it. The child stares at you like you've insulted his ancestors. You probably have. No one tells you what to do. That's not how things work here. You're expected to know, and if you don't, you're expected to figure it out without asking stupid questions like, is this sharp thing supposed to be covered in blood already? At first you think it's raining. It isn't. It's starting to rain. Which is worse, because now you know the full downpour is coming. And you're not ready. No one's ever ready. Even the people who've lived here their entire lives glance up and frown, like the sky just made a rude joke. You shuffle over to the edge of the shelter. Shelter, being a generous word for some branches tied together with gut strings and the hope that trees are waterproof. Spoiler, they're not. The wind picks up. It cuts through your hide clothing like you're wearing a damp napkin. Your boots, which are just scraps of animal skin tied around your feet, begin soaking through immediately. Your toes squish. You pretend not to notice. The rain begins in earnest. Cold, fat drops that feel less like water and more like punishment. Everything is suddenly slick. The fire sputters. The walls creak. The smell of wet fur fills the air like an apology no one wants to hear. You duck into the cave, hoping for relief. It's slightly better. Slightly. The roof leaks in 3 different places, and the floor is now mud. You watch a centipede confidently stroll across your sleeping area. It seems more prepared for this life than you are. The others are already adjusting. Someone's moving firewood inside, another's hanging hides to dry near the smoke. You try to help and knock over a stack of tools. A loud clatter follows. So do the stairs. You are now both wet and in the way. Later, someone tosses you a half-dry pelt to wear. You drape it around yourself like a soggy emperor and try not to look too grateful. It helps. Not much, but a little. You sit down, dripping quietly into a puddle, while the storm howls outside like it has a personal vendetta against your comfort. It starts with a cough. Nothing dramatic. Just a little scratch in the throat. You try to ignore it. By mid-morning, you're wheezing like a dying goat and your nose has decided to self-destruct. Your eyes are watering. Your skin feels warm, not cozy warm, infection warm. You announce this to no one, because no one is going to do anything about it. You have officially entered the medical care phase of the Stone Age. Congratulations. There are no doctors, no clinics, no herbs arranged neatly on a wooden shelf by someone named Fern. Instead, an elder takes one look at you, grunts, and hands you a wad of crushed leaves. You chew them. It tastes like mouldy spinach marinated in old sweat. You nod solemnly, as if it's helping. It isn't. Your fever worsens. Someone suggests a steam treatment. This involves sitting in a hole next to heated rocks while they pour water over them. You cough, sweat, and contemplate death. It's like a sauna designed by someone who's only ever heard of saunas from hallucinations. At some point, someone smears a mixture of mud, herbs, and possibly animal fat onto your chest. For drawing out the spirits, apparently. You don't ask questions. You're too busy vibrating from chills. Pain? There's no pain relief. You get a stick to bite on, and a knowing look from the tribe's unofficial healer, a woman with exactly 3 teeth and a permanent scowl. She whispers something in a language that might just be annoyed breathing. The cure for anything, it seems, is either time, luck, or not dying before it goes away. You try to sleep. Your dreams are strange. In one, you're being chased by a squirrel the size of a bison. In another, your spear is talking. You wake up gasping in a puddle of your own sweat and leaf fragments. By the end of the day, you're not better. But you're not worse either. Which, in Stone Age terms, means you might survive. Or you might just be entering phase 2. Bone pain. You accidentally bumped someone today. Not hard. Just a little shoulder graze on your way to sit by the fire. They looked at you like you'd just challenged them to a duel. You stammered an apology. They didn't answer. They simply stood up, squared their shoulders, and stared at you until your soul left your body through your socks. It turns out, conflict resolution in the Stone Age is not based on open dialogue and active listening. It's more of a, let's see who survives this disagreement kind of culture. There's no concept of de-escalation. No one is diffusing the tension with a calming voice or a gentle reminder that we're all part of a team. Instead, someone casually sharpens a stick nearby. Not because of your conflict, just as a general lifestyle choice. But still, the message is clear: don't push your luck. Disputes are settled through stares, silence, or sudden acts of deeply personal violence. If it escalates, there are options. A fight, an insult ritual, or just straight-up banishment into the woods where the leopards are always hiring. You try to smooth things over by offering a smoked fish. It's not accepted. Not because of the gesture, but because the fish is overcooked. and now you've offended someone's grandmother, who invented that recipe 8 generations ago. Eventually, a tribal elder mutters something and breaks a small stick in half. This is symbolic. You don't know of what, but the man you bumped grunts and walks away. Apparently, you're not worth murdering. Yet. Later, someone pats you on the back, either in reassurance or to check how many ribs you still have. You're not sure. What you've learned is that, in the Stone Age, maintaining peace takes real skill. A wrong glance, an unfair share of meat, or breathing too loud during sleep can spark consequences you can't talk your way out of. There's no agree to disagree. There's just agree or dig a hole. In modern times, you'd leave a 1-star review. Here, you leave the tribe. Or they leave you. Well, you did it. Sort of. You've made it through a full Stone Age day, though made it might be a stretch. You're alive, yes, but not exactly thriving. Your clothes are damp, your pride is shredded, your stomach hasn't forgiven you, and every muscle in your body has filed a formal complaint. But technically, you're still breathing, which here qualifies as success. The tribe hasn't exiled you. That may be an oversight, or maybe they've silently agreed you're too entertaining to get rid of just yet. After all, watching you attempt to climb that tree for berries, actually wasps, did provide the entire group with 6 minutes of bonding. As night falls again, you sit near the fire, not close, but closer than yesterday. You're beginning to understand the rhythm of this world, the quiet mornings, the harsh sun, the constant need to earn everything, food, shelter, respect, with hands that weren't trained for any of this. No one has explained anything to you. They never do. This is not a world of instructions. It's a world of observation, of imitation, of failing until failure teaches you what survival won't. Someone hands you a strip of roasted meat. You nod in thanks. It's tough, salty, and has a hint of fur. You chew it like it's your last meal. It might be. You still don't belong here. Not really. Your brain keeps trying to apply logic from another time, one with microwaves and socks. But slowly, painfully, it's starting to adapt. You now know that fire doesn't make itself, water is rarely a gift, and roots are trying to kill you. The tribe chats quietly in their own language, one that's more gesture and expression than words. You catch none of it, but you nod anyway. It seems polite. You lie down on your patch of cold earth, wrapped in furs that smell like every animal in the forest played tug-of-war with them. Your body hurts. Your dignity is gone. But for now, nothing is biting you. In the Stone Age, that's about as good as it gets. You wouldn't last a day. Technically, you just did. But let's not push our luck with a second one. It began with silence and formality. Two things that, in Edo period Japan, were never as harmless as they seemed. Lord Asano Naganori of Akko, a young daimyo from western Japan, had been summoned to the shogun's palace in Edo to perform a delicate duty: receive and entertain envoys from the Emperor of Kyoto. This was no small task. The court demanded precision. Protocol was everything. And watching over the ceremonies was a man named Kira Yoshinaka, a high-ranking court official, master of rituals, and unofficially a man infamous for expecting bribes. Lord Asano, however, was not one to play those games. He came from a proud samurai lineage. Honor was not a bargaining chip, and perhaps, to his own detriment, he had a face that could not pretend to smile. Kira noticed, and Kira resented it. Over the days that followed, Kira began needling Asano with insults, quiet jabs, sharp corrections, petty humiliations. The courtly halls of Edo Castle echoed with whispers. Kira had called Asano a country bumpkin, had mocked his manners, had made him wait outside rooms he was supposed to host. The tension built quietly and painfully, like pressure beneath lacquered wood. And then, on the 21st day of the 3rd month in the year 1701, it snapped. In a hallway of Edo Castle, Asano drew his short sword and attacked Kira. His blade grazed the older man's face and shoulder, an insult, not a kill. But to draw a weapon inside the shogun's palace? That was unforgivable, no matter the provocation. Kira survived. Asano was immediately arrested. Within hours, the shogunate passed judgment. No investigation, no second chances. Lord Asano was ordered to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, by sunset. His lands were confiscated, his retainers were cast out, his family was dishonored, and most cruelly of all, Kira remained untouched, unpunished, victorious. But the story didn't end there. Among Asano's now masterless samurai, his Ronin, was a man named Oishi Kuranosuke. And while the world moved on, Oishi began to plan. Quietly. Patiently. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about something deeper, something older, a test of Bushido, the way of the warrior. And it had just begun. The death of Lord Asano should have marked the end. His house was abolished, his men disbanded. The shogun had made it clear there would be no vendetta. Kira remained in his estate under the protection of the law. Justice had been rendered, swift and cold. But outside the shogun's palace, the code of the samurai told a different story. Oishi Kuranosuke, chief retainer of Asano, didn't weep. He didn't shout. He bowed his head, dispersed the samurai of Akko, and obeyed the decree. Outwardly, he submitted. Inwardly, he waited. The Ronin scattered. Some returned to their families. Others took up trades. Merchants, monks, even beggars. The world believed they had moved on, that their loyalty had died with their lord. But under the surface, a plan was coiling tighter. Oishi knew that the shogunate was watching. Revenge was a crime, especially when aimed at a man like Kira, who still held rank and favor. Any sign of plotting would mean arrest. Or worse, execution before the deed could be done. So Oishi played the fool. He moved to Kyoto, drank openly in the streets, gambled in public, took up with courtesans. For over a year he projected the image of a man broken by disgrace, disheveled, drunk, dishonored, the perfect portrait of failure. Meanwhile, his fellow Ronin were doing the opposite. In secret letters, in dark corners of tea houses and shrines, they stayed in touch. They studied Kira's movements. They measured the layout of his Edo mansion. They learned the guards' habits, the gate's rhythms, and the pulse of the household. Kira, for his part, relaxed. He had friends in high places, and a scar that healed well. His enemies had vanished into the wind. What more could they do? They had no master, no name, and no power. And this was exactly what Oishi wanted him to think. Because behind the sake-stained robes and slurred words was a mind sharper than any blade. He wasn't just planning a killing. He was crafting a statement, one that would speak to all of Japan, one that would show the world that Bushido, the true Bushido, was not dead, not yet. And in the frozen heart of winter, when the time was right, that silence would finally shatter. By the time snow began to fall over Edo in late 1702, 47 Ronin had made their decision. No more waiting, no more watching. The time for vengeance had come. Oishi Kuranosuke gathered his scattered brothers in arms. Some travelled for days to reach Edo, others had never truly left. But one by one they reassembled, not as wandering men, but as samurai once more. Not for pay, not for honour restored, but for duty, the kind that lives after death. The plan was precise. Each man had a role. This was not a brawl, it was a performance, and every detail mattered. They forged new weapons, silent and fast. They crafted winter armour, light enough to scale walls but thick enough to deflect a strike. They even built a fake fire brigade, complete with uniforms, to avoid suspicion if anyone questioned why a group of men was marching through the city at night. Kira's mansion was a fortress. High walls, dozens of guards, multiple gates, but it had been studied for over a year. The layout was memorized, the routines predictable, the servants indifferent. Most had grown lax, Why wouldn't they? The Ronin were gone. Their leader, drunk. Their cause, buried. Oishi made sure his own family was safe. He divorced his wife and sent her and their younger children away, far from the coming blood. He knew what this would cost. He knew it might not work. And he knew, even if it did, they would all be sentenced to death. But the way of Bushido didn't leave room for personal safety. On the 14th night of the 12th month, January 30th, 1703 by the Western calendar, they moved. Snow blanketed Edo, muffling footsteps and deadening sound. It was the perfect ally. At 2 a.m, the Ronin split into 2 teams. One would attack the rear gate, the other the front. A signal would be given when both sides were in position. The mission was simple: seize the house, kill Kira, and disturb as little of the city as possible. No innocents, no unnecessary blood, just justice. Some had waited over a year. Others had spent that year pretending to forget. Now, with swords drawn and the night watching, forgetting was no longer necessary. Justice would no longer wait. The attack began in silence. No shouting, no wild charges, just coordinated, measured violence beneath the pale winter moon. Oishi's front team breached the main gate with a battering ram, crashing through the heavy doors before the guards even knew they were under siege. Meanwhile, the rear team scaled the walls, quietly dispatching sentries with the practiced efficiency of men who had rehearsed this night 100 times in their minds. Kira's household panicked. Guards scrambled in disarray, half-dressed, many drunk or asleep. Servants screamed. Lanterns were lit too late. The Ronin moved like wolves, cutting down opposition with swift, precise strikes. They didn't kill indiscriminately. They shouted out that only Kira was their target. Anyone who didn't resist was spared. Oishi's eldest son, Chikara, only 16, fought beside his father. For all the talk of Bushido, this was no abstract ideal. This was blood, steel, smoke in the lungs, swords slipping on icy tiles. It was loyalty carried out to the letter, with the price carved into flesh. The Ronin combed the mansion for Kira, but the man had vanished. They scoured every room, every hidden corner. They interrogated servants. Finally, they found a secret courtyard. In a shed behind the garden, trembling beneath a pile of charcoal and straw, was a man in plain robes, his face pale, his body shaking. It was Kira. He refused to identify himself. He refused to speak. But he bore the scar Lord Asano had left on his face nearly 2 years earlier. Oishi offered him the chance to die with honor. A dagger was placed before him, seppuku, like a true samurai. But Kira couldn't do it. He simply stared, frozen. The man who had destroyed a clan without lifting a blade could not take responsibility when his time came. Oishi bowed once. Then he struck. Kira Yoshinaka died not as a lord, but as a coward. The Ronin took his head, wrapped it in cloth, and marched, calmly, in full armor, through the snow-covered streets of Edo. They carried the trophy to Sengakuji Temple, where Lord Asano was buried. There they cleaned the head, laid it before his grave, and prayed. Their revenge was complete, their fates sealed. When morning broke, Edo awoke to the impossible. Word spread like wildfire. Kira Yoshinaka was dead, slain in the heart of the city by 47 Ronin, who had not fled, not hidden, but walked in formation to the temple where their lord lay buried. They made no effort to escape. They simply knelt, presented the severed head, and waited. The city, usually loud with merchants and samurai clamour, fell strangely quiet. Some called them heroes, some called them criminals, but no one called them cowards. The authorities were now in a bind. The law was clear. Revenge killings were illegal. Samurai were not above justice, no matter how poetic their cause. But the public didn't see criminals. They saw men who had embodied Bushido to its bitter end. They had obeyed not the shogun's laws, but the deeper, older law of loyalty. The shogunate deliberated for weeks. This wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was about the soul of samurai culture. If the Ronin were spared, it would encourage more vendettas. If they were punished, the people might revolt in spirit. Meanwhile, the 47 men remained at Sengakuji. They did not resist. They did not beg. They sat in quiet reflection, tending to Lord Asano's grave and awaiting their fate. Oishi, the architect of it all, said nothing publicly. He had already said everything through his actions. Eventually, the decision came down. The Ronin would be allowed to die honorably. They would not be executed as criminals, but ordered to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, like the samurai they still claimed to be. On the morning of February 4th, 1703, each man was handed a dagger. They dressed in white robes, the color of purity and death. They bowed to the officials, to each other, and to the memory of Lord Asano. And then, one by one, they cut into themselves, guided by a second who would complete the ritual with a clean decapitation. Even Chikara, Oishi's teenage son, took the blade without hesitation. Not a single man faltered. They died not in disgrace but in legend. Their bodies were buried beside their master at Sengakuji. The graves are still there, 47 stones in neat rows, covered in incense and offerings from pilgrims who still whisper their names. Because in death, they had achieved what life could not. They had become eternal. The tale of the 47 Ronin didn't fade. It echoed, first through the streets of Edo, then into the halls of power, and finally into the soul of Japan. For centuries, samurai had been both warriors and servants, expected to kill without hesitation and die without complaint. But the 47 Ronin blurred the lines. They were criminals, yes, but also paragons of loyalty. They broke the law, but followed the spirit of Bushido to the letter. They disobeyed the shogun, but honored their lord in death more completely than most had in life. The paradox fascinated everyone. Was Bushido about obedience to the state, or to one's master? Was justice defined by the law of man, or the will of the warrior? Tokugawa officials tried to downplay the incident. They feared copycats. They feared chaos. But it was too late. The story had taken root, growing wild and impossible to contain. Within weeks, kabuki plays were being staged, thinly veiled retellings where the characters had different names but the same story. The authorities banned them. New plays popped up anyway. People bought woodblock prints showing the Ronin mid-attack, kneeling in seppuku, or marching solemnly with Kira's head. Even those who believed in strict obedience found themselves conflicted, because while the Ronin had acted outside the law, they had done so with dignity, with restraint. They didn't loot, they didn't gloat, they didn't run. They had waited, planned, struck, and then surrendered. In that restraint, people saw something pure, something old. Oishi Kuranosuke became the archetype of the ideal retainer, calm, strategic, loyal to death. His son, Chikara, became the image of youthful devotion. The younger Ronin were remembered as noble souls who sacrificed futures they never got to live. And the story didn't just survive, it evolved. Over time, it became a national legend, celebrated in plays, novels, and eventually films. Every generation found something in the tale, whether it was pride, sorrow, or a blueprint for courage. In a world where loyalty is often a word on paper, the Ronin had written theirs in blood and snow. And whether or not the shogunate approved, the people had decided these men were not traitors. They were the last true samurai. The 47 graves at Sengakuji Temple became more than memorials. They became a shrine, not only to the men buried there, but to the very spirit of samurai honor. Pilgrims came from across Japan, lighting incense, bowing low, and whispering prayers not to gods, but to men. The temple itself became a quiet paradox. In a city of noise and commerce, Sengakuji was still. Monks tended the grounds with solemn care. Snow fell over the headstones each winter, just as it had the night Kira died. Each year on the anniversary of the attack, December 14th by the lunar calendar, visitors gather to commemorate the deed. Lanterns flicker, and incense hangs thick in the air. Some arrive in full samurai attire, others come silently, leaving flowers or coins or notes of gratitude. Even those who didn't believe in vengeance found themselves drawn to the sight. Because whatever your stance on law or ethics, you couldn't ignore the sacrifice, the discipline. The stillness of 47 men who gave up their futures for an idea older than the shogunate itself. For generations, the graves were treated with awe. School children were taken there to learn what loyalty meant. Soldiers visited before being sent to war. Writers, poets, and philosophers left lines scribbled in notebooks, trying to grasp the quiet power of what had happened. And while the world outside changed, Edo becoming Tokyo, Japan transforming from a feudal land into a modern state, the story didn't fade. Instead, it grew. Even during the Meiji Restoration, when samurai were abolished and the code of Bushido was folded into nationalism, the tale remained. It was repurposed, yes, but never forgotten. Films were made, plays were revived, books were translated into languages the Ronin had never heard. Tourists now visit Sengaku-ji alongside skyscrapers and vending machines. They take selfies, as people do. But even so, most fall silent when they step before the stone of Oishi Kuranosuke. There's something about it, something still, something exact. Here lies a man who waited a year to strike one blow, and knew he would die for it. Here lies a man who chose loyalty over safety. And here, in this quiet corner of Tokyo, you can still feel the weight of that choice. Even after 3 centuries, the snow has not melted. As the centuries passed, the story of the 47 Ronin drifted from history into legend, and from legend into entertainment. What had begun as a real act of vengeance under the Tokugawa shogunate was now theatre, quite literally. By the mid-18th century, the tale was immortalized as Chushingura, a kabuki and bunraku drama that altered names and dramatized events, but kept the soul intact. Loyalty, sacrifice, justice delayed but not denied. Audiences wept, cheered, returned to see it again and again. The characters became archetypes. Oishi, the stoic genius, Kira, the arrogant villain, Chikara, the noble youth. Stage actors specialized in these roles, passing the performances from generation to generation like heirlooms. Some families played Oishi for decades. The scripts changed, but the meaning never did. When Japan opened to the West in the 19th century, the 47 Ronin went global. Scholars translated the tale. Admirers praised its moral weight. It was the kind of story Victorian Europe adored. Orderly, noble, tragic. Hollywood, naturally, had its own ideas. Films were made. Some reverent, others, well, less so. In 2013, a fantasy action movie starring Keanu Reeves reimagined the tale with witches, demons, and a half-English protagonist. It bombed in Japan. The people who still held candles at Sengaku-ji didn't come for CGI. They came for something else. Quiet, reverent, and real. Yet the fact that such a film was made at all speaks volumes. The story had reached the point where it could be distorted because it was universally recognized. Even if twisted, it could not be forgotten. In manga and anime, echoes of the Ronin show up in subtle ways. Stories of exiled warriors, lone swordsmen with impossible missions, ragtag bands of loyal followers defying corrupt power. The structure is familiar, because at its core, the tale is timeless. A group of men, bound by oath, facing death to preserve meaning in a crumbling moral world. Modern Japan has moved far beyond the age of katanas and lords. But the idea of loyalty surviving even when the system has failed you still lingers. It surfaces in boardrooms, in classrooms, in pop songs and protest speeches. Not always directly, but as a whisper. That real honor may be inconvenient, difficult, and even illegal, but it endures. And every time it does, the 47 Ronin rise again. 300 years later, the 47 Ronin still haven't left. Their names are etched not only on stone tablets at Sengaku-ji, but on the Japanese psyche. They aren't just historical figures, they're symbols, the kind you point to when everything else becomes murky, when law and justice no longer agree, when loyalty costs more than life. And that's what makes their story so enduring. It has no clean ending. Yes, they died, every one of them. But in death, they sparked a debate that has never fully cooled. Were they heroes or criminals? Was their loyalty noble or dangerously outdated? Did they elevate Bushido or prove it incompatible with law and order? The Tokugawa shogunate wanted to bury the conversation with them. But instead, their deaths ignited a slow-burning fire under every institution that tried to define what it meant to be samurai. Even now, you'll find university professors arguing both sides. Some say the Ronin were glorified murderers clinging to a dying code. Others say they represented the very best of it, an incorruptible moral compass in an increasingly bureaucratic world. And the public? Still firmly in the second camp. In modern Japan, you'll find echoes of the Ronin everywhere. Corporate employees who refuse to betray a boss during scandal, even at the cost of their own careers. Soldiers who serve quietly and sacrifice without complaint. Even manga protagonists who stand alone, armed with nothing but principle. The Ronin are not relics, they're reference points. And in a time where loyalty is rare and truth is negotiable, their story feels strangely modern. Oishi Kuranosuke never wrote a memoir. He didn't leave behind a treatise on ethics, but he left behind a question, sharpened like a blade. What do you serve, and what are you willing to pay for it? The 47 Ronin answered that question, not with words, not with slogans, but with time, silence, and finally, their lives. They obeyed a dead man. They broke the law to keep a promise. And in doing so, they became more than samurai. They became a mirror, one that every generation must look into and ask itself, would I have followed? And would I have had the courage to stop? In ancient Egypt, to harm a cat was to flirt with disaster. Not just social shame, but legal punishment, and sometimes mob justice. That's how serious it was. Cats weren't pets in the modern sense. They were holy, untouchable, and, in some cases, mourned more deeply than relatives. When a family cat died, Egyptians would shave their eyebrows in grief, not out of fashion, but ritual. Cats weren't just companions, they were guardians of the divine. This reverence was rooted in religion. The goddess Bastet, daughter of Ra, was the feline deity of home, fertility, music, and protection. She began as a lioness, fierce and destructive, but over time she softened into a cat, retaining power but gaining grace. Her temples were filled with offerings, jewelry, perfumes, and most importantly, cats. Real ones, living, breathing cats who roamed freely, fed by priests, and were considered manifestations of the goddess herself. Archaeologists have uncovered vast cat cemeteries near Bastet's main temple in Bubastis. Mummified cats, wrapped with the same care as human corpses, lay in neat rows. Some were buried with jewelry, others were preserved with resins and perfumes. This wasn't a novelty, it was an industry. Cats were bred for sacred purposes, blessed, and sometimes ritually sacrificed so they could serve in the afterlife. The symbolism ran deep. Cats hunted snakes, the eternal enemy of Ra, the sun god. A cat killing a snake wasn't just pest control, it was cosmic warfare. Cats lounged in sunlight, patrolled granaries, and bore that aloof, unreadable look that seemed otherworldly. Egyptians saw that and didn't think lazy pet. They thought divine mystery. Foreigners were baffled. Greek historians like Herodotus were amazed, and perhaps slightly amused, by how quickly Egyptian wrath could be triggered if a cat was even accidentally harmed. During one battle, it said the Persians carried cats as living shields, knowing the Egyptians would hesitate to strike. To the modern eye, it may seem excessive, But to the Egyptians, animals weren't beneath humans. They were closer to the gods. Cats, in their grace and independence, stood at the intersection of beauty and the sacred, not just pets, hortals. On the island of Crete, surrounded by the rolling blue of the Aegean Sea, the bull reigned, not in pastures, but in palaces. The Minoans, one of Europe's earliest advanced civilizations, didn't just admire bulls, they ritualized them. They built myths around them. They painted them on walls like gods. Step into the Grand Palace of Knossos, and you'll find frescoes that pulse with energy. Leaping bulls, acrobats vaulting over horns, scenes alive with rhythm and movement. This was more than sport. This was sacred spectacle. It was called bull leaping, a ritual dance, a death-defying act of agility and respect. Both men and women took part, not to kill the bull, but to interact with it, to bridge the space between human and divine. Because for the Minoans, the bull wasn't just an animal, it was a cosmic force. The symbolism likely ran deep into their mythology. The legendary Minotaur, half man, half bull, was said to live in a labyrinth beneath Knossos. Was it myth? Maybe. But myths are often echoes of deeper truths. Perhaps the Minotaur was a memory of ritual power, of humans merging with beasts in sacred spaces. The bull also connected to the sky. Its horns mirrored the crescent moon. Its roar like thunder. Its body, immense and muscular, seemed too powerful to belong to mere flesh. In a time when people read the world through symbols, the bull was a message. Strength, fertility, motion. Sacrifices were likely part of this reverence, though the Minoans were less bloodthirsty than later Greek cultures. Some bulls were killed ritually, yes, but others were honored in life. They were paraded, painted, and praised. The power of the bull wasn't always in its death, it was in its presence. And unlike the Roman arena, where bulls died for entertainment, Minoan rituals seemed to emphasize harmony, a dangerous, respectful dance between human and beast. The point wasn't to dominate, but to touch something beyond. The bull was not a symbol of chaos. It was a gatekeeper of cosmic order. In Minoan Crete, to face a bull wasn't just bravery. It was spiritual contact, a momentary balance between flesh and myth. In the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, beneath the tangled canopy and echoing bird calls, one creature ruled not by size, but by mystery, the jaguar. To the Maya, the Olmec, and the Aztecs, this spotted predator wasn't just an animal. It was a god in disguise, a shapeshifter, a traveler between worlds. The jaguar hunted by night, moving silently through shadows, with eyes that pierced darkness. That alone made it sacred. In a world where night represented the underworld and the unknown, any creature that could move through it with ease was a guide, a messenger, or a ruler. The Olmec, the earliest known Mesoamerican civilization, carved colossal stone heads that some believe bear feline features. Wide noses, curved lips, fierce eyes. Their art also shows the were-jaguar figure, part human, part jaguar, often with fangs and snarling mouths. Scholars still debate its meaning, but one thing is certain: the Olmec didn't just fear the jaguar, they wanted to become it. The Maya took this further. Their kings often associated themselves with jaguars, wearing pelts, helmets, and glyphs that linked their power to the beast. The underworld, called Xibalba, was a place of trials and darkness, and the jaguar was the creature that walked its halls freely. Some Maya gods, like the powerful jaguar god of the underworld, embodied the duality of night and death, feared but necessary. And then came the Aztecs, whose elite warriors were known as the Jaguar Knights. These weren't just soldiers. They were sacred fighters chosen to channel the jaguar's ferocity. Dressed in full jaguar pelts, complete with snarling masks and claws, they didn't just fight like jaguars, they believed they were jaguars. Battle wasn't just about conquest. It was a ritual reenactment of cosmic struggle. Sacrifice, as grim as it sounds to modern ears, was central. Jaguars were sometimes sacrificed to the gods, not out of cruelty, but reverence. To kill a jaguar meant releasing a sacred force. To offer its heart was to give the gods something they recognized as kin. To the Mesoamerican mind, the jaguar wasn't merely a big cat. It was a portal between life and death, day and night, man and God. A predator, yes, but also a priest in fur. In the temples and forests of ancient India, the elephant was more than a majestic animal. It was living divinity carved in flesh and muscle. No creature loomed larger in both size and symbolism. To ancient Indians, elephants embodied strength, wisdom, memory, royalty, and the sacred rhythm of the universe itself. They weren't just worshipped, they were woven into myth. At the center of this reverence stands Ganesha, the elephant-headed god. With a belly full of sweets, a broken tusk, and an eternally calm smile, Ganesha is beloved across all corners of Indian life. He is the remover of obstacles, the patron of new beginnings, the god one prays to before weddings, travels, or building a house. But behind his gentle appearance is a powerful origin. According to one legend, Ganesha was created by the goddess Parvati to guard her privacy. When the god Shiva tried to enter her chamber, Ganesha blocked him, unaware that this was Parvati's husband. In fury, Shiva beheaded the boy. When Parvati discovered what had happened, her grief shook heaven and earth. To make amends, Shiva promised to restore the boy's life using the head of the first creature he found, an elephant. And so Ganesha was reborn, part human, part elephant, and wholly divine. But the veneration of elephants goes beyond myth. In historical India, real elephants served as symbols of kingship. They were the thrones of war, armored, decorated, and revered by those who rode and feared them. An army with elephants was not just powerful, it was blessed. Temples often kept elephants as part of their rituals. In the southern state of Kerala, sacred elephants are still paraded in annual festivals, adorned with golden headpieces and painted tusks. Devotees bow as they pass, not out of fear, but reverence. These elephants are seen as earthly forms of divine power, slow-moving gods that walk among mortals. In Vedic literature, the elephant is associated with rain and fertility, especially the cosmic elephant Airavata, the mount of Indra, king of the gods. Airavata was said to be born from the churning of the ocean, white as a cloud, with multiple heads, trumpeting storms into being. To ancient India, the elephant was not merely an animal. It was thunder made flesh, wisdom on 4 legs, and the quiet strength of eternity. To most ancient peoples, the serpent was never just a snake. It was a symbol of power, rebirth, danger, knowledge, and the divine. And depending on where you stood in the ancient world, it could either be your sacred protector or the mouth of chaos. In ancient Mesopotamia, the serpent played both roles. The god Ningishida, depicted with serpents emerging from his shoulders, was a deity of the underworld and vegetation. He was both guardian and gatekeeper, a being that slithered between the world of the living and the dead. The Sumerians didn't hate serpents. They understood them as complex. Dangerous, yes, but necessary. In Hinduism, snakes, or nagas, were divine beings in their own right. Not monsters, not demons, but semi-divine spirits associated with water, fertility, and cosmic balance. The nagas lived beneath rivers and lakes in vast jeweled palaces. And one of the most iconic images in Indian mythology is Vishnu, god of preservation, reclining on the coiled body of the infinite serpent Shesha, who floats on the cosmic ocean. The serpent wasn't threatening. It was time itself, patient, coiled, eternal. But serpents were not always gentle. In the Hebrew tradition, the snake in Eden was cunning and cursed, tied forever to deception and the fall of man. But even here, there's nuance. In the Book of Numbers, Moses uses a bronze serpent mounted on a pole to heal plague-stricken Israelites, a rare moment where the snake becomes salvation, not sin. In Mesoamerica, the serpent reached divine heights. The feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, a combination of snake and bird, represented wind, learning, and creation itself. His duality was crucial, grounded in the earth, yet capable of flight. It was the perfect metaphor for divine intelligence, slithering low, yet touching the sky. And then there's the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, an image that appeared from Egypt to Greece. It represented infinity, the cycle of life and death, destruction and rebirth. To the ancient mind, the serpent wasn't evil. It was mystery embodied, silent, cold-blooded, and eternal. Not quite beast, not quite God, but always watching, always returning. While cats lounged in temples and birds soared toward the heavens, another creature ruled the waters of ancient Egypt, with jaws wide and eyes unblinking, the crocodile. To the average villager along the Nile, crocodiles were a daily threat. They lurked beneath the muddy waters, silent and invisible, until the moment they struck. And yet, instead of being hated, they were worshipped. Feared, yes, but also honoured, respected, even protected. This uneasy reverence centered around the crocodile god Sobek, a deity with the body of a man and the head of a crocodile. Sobek wasn't some minor swamp spirit. He was a creator, a fertility god, and a symbol of the Nile's unpredictable might. He was also a protector of the pharaoh and guardian of the army. In one myth, Sobek helped restore the body of Osiris, making him not only a fearsome deity, but a healer and restorer of life. Sobek's domain was water, strength, and the military. The Nile, lifeline of Egypt, was his bloodstream. Crocodiles were his eyes, his messengers, his avatars. They swam beneath the reeds like priests in motion. Temples to Sobek were built throughout Egypt, especially near crocodile-infested waters. The most famous was in Crocodilopolis, yes, a real place, known to the Egyptians as Shedet, located in the Fayum oasis. There, the priests cared for a live, sacred crocodile, believed to be the living incarnation of Sobek himself. This divine beast was adorned with gold and gems and fed the finest cuts of meat. It lounged in an artificial lake, respected like royalty. When it died, it was mummified, carefully wrapped, perfumed, and entombed. Thousands of mummified crocodiles have been discovered across Egypt, often buried with baby crocs alongside them, like spiritual offspring. But Sobek wasn't just about animals and offerings. He represented the brutal side of nature, the reminder that power can be beautiful and terrifying all at once. The Nile could bring life or drown you. Crocodiles could be gods or devourers. Worship wasn't a shield against danger, it was a recognition of it. The ancient Egyptians didn't try to tame the crocodile, they honoured it, because in its jaws they saw the smile of a god. In the cold, shadow-draped world of the Norse, animals weren't pets or companions. They were omens, warnings, pieces of prophecy given teeth and wings, and no creatures loomed larger in this harsh mythology than the wolf and the raven. Let's start with the ravens, Hugin and Munin, the ever-watchful eyes of Odin, the All-Father. Their names meant thought and memory. Each morning, they flew across the world, collecting secrets and signs. Each night, they perched on Odin's shoulders, whispering what they had seen. These were not just birds. They were extensions of a god's mind, the very embodiment of wisdom, gathering, and foresight. In battlefields, ravens fed on corpses. To the Norse, their presence wasn't just gruesome, it was sacred. A raven circling above wasn't just looking for carrion, it was reading fate. And then came the wolves. Fenrir, the great wolf, was not just another beast in the Norse bestiary. He was the apocalypse on 4 legs. Born of the trickster god Loki and a giantess, Fenrir was fated to devour Odin himself during Ragnarok, the final destruction of the gods. Terrified of this destiny, the gods tricked Fenrir into being bound by a magical chain. He broke every chain but one, a silken thread forged from impossible things, the sound of a cat's footfall, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish. When they finally bound him, he howled in fury and waited for the end of days. Wolves weren't always monstrous, though. Odin himself was accompanied by two wolves, Geri and Freki, who devoured the food from his table. Odin famously needed only wine. These wolves were part of him, just as the ravens were, representing the raw primal side of divine power, loyalty, hunger, and instinct. To the Norse, these animals were not metaphors. They were living forces of the cosmos, part of the great cold machinery of fate. They didn't need to be cute, or loyal, or even tame. They needed to be true. In the North, animals weren't guides to peace or prosperity. They were messengers of war, symbols of prophecy, and the last things you might see before glory, or death. In ancient Vedic India, the cow was not simply a farm animal. It was sacred essence, distilled into muscle and milk. To understand its role in Vedic culture is to understand how deeply the ancients saw divinity in the everyday. The Rig Veda, one of the oldest sacred texts in the world, refers to cows as agnya, not to be killed. They were associated with Aditi, the infinite mother goddess, and with Prithvi, the earth herself. The cow wasn't seen as separate from nature. It was nature. It nourished like the earth, gave like the heavens, and walked among men like a living blessing. Milk, butter, ghee, and curds weren't just food. They were offerings used in yajnas, fire rituals where the gods were fed through flame. To pour clarified butter into fire wasn't simply a gesture of devotion. It was cosmic alchemy, transforming the cow's gift into divine energy. Cows were linked to Kamadhenu, the mythical cow of plenty, who could grant any wish and nourish all of creation. Kamadhenu was said to reside in the hermitages of sages, emerging during times of need to restore balance and abundance. She was not bred or owned, she was revered. The zebu, India's native humped cattle, were decorated with bells and garlands. During festivals like Gopashtami, cows were bathed, painted, and worshipped. In some villages, they were even led into temples to receive blessings, or give them. Unlike the warlike status of bulls in Crete or the feared glory of jaguars in Mesoamerica, the cow represented gentleness, restraint, and sustenance. Even when empires rose and fell, the cow remained untouched. Politically neutral, yet spiritually untouchable. This reverence extended to laws. Ancient Indian legal codes discouraged, and sometimes outright banned, cow slaughter. Not because of economics, but because it was considered a crime against the dharmic order. To harm a cow was to wound the cosmic balance. And even today, thousands of years later, that reverence hasn't vanished. It echoes in temples, in fields, in daily prayers whispered beside roadside shrines. In Vedic India, the cow wasn't just the backbone of the village economy. It was the mother of creation, patiently chewing grass while holding the cosmos in its breath. Across ancient cultures, birds soared higher than mere animals. They weren't just admired for flight. They were believed to transcend realms. Earth, sky, heaven, underworld. Birds passed through them all. To ancient minds, this made them natural messengers of the divine. In ancient Egypt, the ibis held sacred status through the god Thoth, deity of wisdom, writing, and magic. Thoth was often depicted with the head of an ibis, long-beaked, contemplative, poised. The bird's careful motions mirrored the god's own measured intellect. Ibises flocked along the Nile's banks, and their presence was seen as auspicious, tied to lunar cycles and the balance of truth itself. Thousands were mummified and buried in honor, not because they were useful, but because they were holy. Then came the hawk, symbol of Horus, god of kingship and the rising sun. With its piercing gaze and skyward flight, the hawk embodied divine watchfulness. Pharaohs, considered living sons of Horus, aligned themselves with this bird of prey. Even the eye of Horus, one of Egypt's most enduring symbols of protection, originated from the hawk's keen sight. In Mesopotamia, the eagle was linked with gods of storm and war, a creature too grand to be of earth alone. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, birds appear as signs of favour or warning, often bridging the mortal realm with that of the gods. The Greeks revered the eagle above all. It was the sacred animal of Zeus, king of the gods. According to myth, Zeus would hurl thunderbolts from the sky with an eagle at his side. The bird became a symbol of divine authority, swift, brutal, untouchable. In India, the majestic Garuda, a massive bird deity, served as the mount, Vahana, of Vishnu, god of preservation. Part eagle, part human, Garuda was no pet. He was a cosmic warrior, a protector of Dharma, and a devourer of serpents. His image adorned temples, shields, and royal emblems. Even in cultures without gods shaped like birds, the symbolism remained: freedom, vision, transformation. Birds migrated across seasons, vanished into clouds, and returned like omens. Their arrival was watched, their flight interpreted. To the ancients, birds were never just birds. They were wings of the gods, eyes of heaven, and souls in motion. Thomas Jefferson believed in ideas, not just politics, ideas. He imagined himself not as a ruler, but as a thinker, a man of the Enlightenment. He surrounded himself with books, copied classical architecture into the design of Monticello, and read Virgil, Locke, and Voltaire by candlelight. His mind wandered far beyond Virginia's plantations. He once declared, "I cannot live without books," and meant it quite literally. When he wrote the phrase, "All men are created equal" in the Declaration of Independence, it wasn't political theatre. It was a philosophical creed, a sentence meant to echo across time. Liberty, reason, self-governance, these were Jefferson's religion. He imagined a world where monarchs crumbled, where free-thinking farmers tilled the soil, where education triumphed over superstition. But the problem was never his vision. It was who got to be included in it. Even as he preached liberty, Jefferson owned more than 600 enslaved people over his lifetime. He knew the system was wrong. He wrote against slavery, called it a moral depravity, a hideous blot. He even proposed gradual emancipation in some of his earlier writings. But when it came time to act, to free the people who lived and worked at Monticello, he hesitated. Most he never freed. Some he sold. And others, like Sally Hemings, were held in a far more intimate, complicated captivity. To Jefferson, liberty was an ideal to chase, but only within a narrow circle. White men with property. That was the political universe he truly imagined. Even as he dreamed of abolishing aristocracy, he kept the deeply unequal structure of slavery intact, benefiting from it materially and politically. It's a contradiction that historians still wrestle with today. Was Jefferson a hypocrite? A product of his time? Or simply a brilliant man with blind spots large enough to swallow generations? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. The man who championed the natural rights of humankind did so from the porch of a plantation, overlooking land tilled by the very people his pen had forgotten. And that paradox would haunt the rest of his legacy, even as his words helped ignite revolutions across continents. Jefferson was a philosopher of liberty, but he lived a life fenced in by chains of his own making. Before he was president, Thomas Jefferson was an architect, not just of buildings, but of ideas. The United States was still an experiment, raw and unfinished. And Jefferson wanted to shape it with the precision of a draftsman holding a compass over blank parchment. After writing the Declaration of Independence in 1776, Jefferson returned to Virginia, where he tried to rewire the legal system from the ground up. He proposed bills to eliminate primogeniture, the law that passed property only to the eldest son, and religious establishments that favoured the Anglican Church. He believed in dismantling inherited privilege, leveling the field for white men to rise on merit rather than bloodline. In 1779, as governor of Virginia, he faced the grim logistics of war. British troops invaded. Jefferson fled his estate when the Redcoats arrived, a move critics would later call cowardly. But he wasn't a warrior. He was a planner, a thinker, a builder. His true battleground was in legislation and letters. When Jefferson went to France as minister in the 1780s, he absorbed the Enlightenment like a sponge. He dined with philosophers, studied architecture, and marveled at European civilization, all while condemning its aristocracy. He returned to America with crates of books, sketches of domes and colonnades, and a refined vision for the new republic. As Secretary of State under Washington, Jefferson quickly clashed with Alexander Hamilton. The nation was splitting into factions. Hamilton favored a strong central government and industry. Jefferson envisioned a republic of independent farmers and weak federal power. Their debates weren't just policy disagreements, they were opposing blueprints for America's soul. Jefferson feared cities. He called them sores on the body politic. To him, the virtuous citizen was rural, self-reliant, educated, and surrounded by land, preferably inherited, but painted with the brush of hard work. His distrust of banks, industrialization, and elite entanglements fueled his lifelong suspicion of centralized power. And yet, Jefferson himself was never entirely free of elites. He was one. Wealthy, land-owning, and deeply political, he embodied the very contradictions he claimed to oppose. Still, in this early phase of his life, Jefferson laid out the foundation of the American identity, a land of liberty and equality, for some, and a government designed by thinkers who believed reason could be written into law. But already the cracks had begun to show. When Thomas Jefferson took the presidential oath in 1801, he called it the Revolution of 1800. Peaceful, bloodless, and ideological. After bitter party infighting, a sitting president had handed power to his political rival, a transfer almost unheard of in the age of monarchs. Jefferson, the man who loathed ceremony and pomp, walked to his inauguration in plain clothes. No horse-drawn carriage, no powdered wig theatrics. Just a man with ideals and a quiet, simmering ambition. He claimed to want a minimalist presidency. Smaller government, lower taxes, less military. And yet, his time in office would redefine the very shape of the United States. The most famous act of Jefferson's presidency came in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase. For $15 million, he bought a chunk of land from Napoleon that doubled the size of the young republic. It stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, more than 800,000 square miles of raw possibility. This was, without question, one of the most consequential real estate deals in human history, and it went against everything Jefferson had claimed to believe in. Nowhere in the Constitution did it say the federal government could purchase new territory. Jefferson knew this. He even considered proposing a constitutional amendment to legalize it, and then quietly dropped the idea. In the end, he justified the act with typical philosophical grace. Necessity had overridden orthodoxy. Idealism, once again, bowed to opportunity. Jefferson dreamed of an empire of liberty, a nation of yeoman farmers spreading across vast landscapes, rooted in independence and virtue. But expansion had consequences. The newly acquired land raised thorny questions. What about the Native American tribes who already lived there? Would slavery spread westward? Could the federal government hold such an immense domain together? Jefferson dispatched Lewis and Clark to explore the new frontier, hoping they'd find a water route to the Pacific and catalogue its wonders. But his private letters revealed deeper ambitions, economic expansion, territorial claims, and yes, a growing sense of national destiny. For a man who claimed to prefer retreating to his garden, Jefferson, as president, wielded immense power and used it when it suited him. He had turned the republic into an empire almost overnight, and the seeds he sowed would change everything that followed. Atop a hill in Virginia, Monticello stood as a monument to Enlightenment ideals: symmetry, reason, beauty. Designed by Jefferson himself, it was filled with books, inventions, and classical references. But behind the architectural elegance was a deeper, darker truth. Monticello was also a plantation, powered by the labor of enslaved people. At any given time, more than 100 enslaved men, women, and children lived and worked there. They tended the fields, made the bricks, cooked the meals, and maintained the house that Jefferson called his sanctuary. Without them, Monticello, and Jefferson's lifestyle, could not have existed. This is the contradiction that lies at the heart of Jefferson's legacy. The man who wrote, "All men are created equal," owned human beings as property. And not just owned them, managed them, sold them, punished them. He kept detailed records of the enslaved people at Monticello, listing them by name, age, and value. He referred to them at times as assets. Jefferson publicly denounced slavery as morally wrong and harmful to both enslaved people and slaveholders. He described it as a moral depravity and a hideous blot. Yet he freed almost none of the people he enslaved. Over 600 passed through his ownership during his lifetime, and fewer than 10 were granted their freedom. Some of this was financial. Jefferson was deeply in debt for most of his life, and his enslaved labor force was collateral. But some of it was simply inertia, the inability or unwillingness to dismantle the system that sustained his wealth and comfort. And then there was Sally Hemings. Hemings was an enslaved woman at Monticello, and evidence now overwhelmingly supports that she bore at least 6 of Jefferson's children. She was also the half-sister of his late wife, the product of generations of slavery's entanglement with rape, coercion, and blurred bloodlines. The relationship between Jefferson and Hemings remains one of the most discussed and discomforting aspects of his life. She had no legal ability to consent. Their children were born into bondage, though Jefferson later freed them. Some during his lifetime, others through his will. Monticello wasn't just a home, it was a mirror, reflecting the hypocrisy, the rationalization, and the cold compartmentalization that allowed a man of ideals to live in a system of oppression. And Jefferson, ever the philosopher, never solved the contradiction. He simply lived with it. Behind the politician and the plantation owner, Thomas Jefferson harbored the soul of a scientist. He didn't just dabble in ideas, he dissected them, observed them, measured them. If something in the natural world could be catalogued, Jefferson wanted it in his notebooks. He called science "my passion," and it wasn't an idle claim. His library included volumes on astronomy, agriculture, anatomy, and meteorology. He conducted weather observations daily. He experimented with crops, designed mechanical gadgets, and corresponded with scientists across Europe. He wasn't a man of faith in the traditional sense. He had faith in observation, in evidence, in what could be seen and understood. One of his lifelong obsessions? Megalonyx jeffersoni, a giant prehistoric sloth, named in his honor after he studied fossils sent to him from a Virginia cave. He believed America needed to prove itself not just politically, but biologically, that its flora and fauna were as grand as Europe's. He even engaged in a strange scientific feud with French naturalist Buffon, who claimed that American animals were smaller and weaker than their European cousins. Jefferson responded by sending him the bones of massive mastodons. Message received. Jefferson's interest in science was also deeply tied to the American frontier. When he commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition, it wasn't just for maps and diplomacy. He wanted data, notes on plants, animals, minerals, geography, and indigenous peoples. He gave the explorers detailed instructions: record everything, return with specimens, bring the unknown into the light. He envisioned the frontier not as wilderness, but as a laboratory, one where American knowledge would grow alongside its territory. But even in this, Jefferson's curiosity was entangled with blind spots. His fascination with Native American culture existed alongside policies that enabled their displacement. He romanticized their societies in his writings while supporting land acquisition that led to their erasure. Jefferson also brought his experimental mindset into architecture and agriculture. He designed his own plough. He tinkered with crop rotation methods. Monticello was, in many ways, a living experiment, half plantation, half scientific estate. To Jefferson, knowledge was not a luxury, it was a civic virtue. A republic, he believed, could not survive without educated citizens grounded in reason and inquiry. But like much else in his life, his pursuit of truth often walked alongside uncomfortable contradictions. Thomas Jefferson didn't hate religion, he simply didn't trust it. To him, organized religion was dangerous, a tool too often used to justify tyranny, silence inquiry, and chain minds. He once wrote, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." And by tyranny, he very much included dogma, clergy, and creeds. Jefferson believed in God, but not the kind who intervenes in daily affairs or parts seas on command. His faith was in the mold of the Enlightenment, deism, a belief in a creator who established the laws of nature and then stepped back to let the universe run its course. No miracles, no burning bushes, just gravity, logic, and the slow turn of the planets. He admired Jesus, but not as a divine being. Jefferson saw him as a moral philosopher, a man who taught compassion, humility, and peace, only to have his message distorted by centuries of church politics. Jefferson respected the Sermon on the Mount. He had little time for the resurrection. In fact, he was so committed to this view that he made his own Bible, literally. Using a razor and glue, Jefferson went through the New Testament and physically cut out all references to miracles, divinity, and supernatural events. What remained was a slim volume of moral teachings, stripped of magic, but rich in ethical instruction. He titled it, "The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth." It was never meant for public consumption. It was a personal guidebook for what he believed Christianity ought to be. His critics were horrified. Godless was the word often hurled at him, especially during the bitter presidential campaigns of the early 1800s. Some even warned that Jefferson's election would lead to Bibles being burned and churches turned into stables. None of that happened. But the suspicion lingered. Despite his skepticism, Jefferson supported religious freedom fiercely. As author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, he enshrined the principle of church-state separation. It was one of only 3 achievements he wanted listed on his gravestone. For Jefferson, faith was not the enemy. Unquestioned faith was. In the quiet of Monticello, beneath the ticking of clocks and the scratch of quills, Jefferson prayed not to a god of thunder, but to reason itself. By the time Thomas Jefferson retired from public life, he was exhausted, politically bruised, financially ruined, and increasingly haunted by the contradictions that had shadowed his legacy. He withdrew to Monticello, his beloved mountaintop estate, where he hoped to spend his final years in quiet reflection, farming, reading, and letter writing. But Jefferson's version of retirement was anything but idle. He founded the University of Virginia, designing its campus himself, right down to the neoclassical columns and the shape of the lecture halls. He wanted it to be a secular temple of reason, a place where students could study freely without interference from church or crown. No religious tests, no dogma, just inquiry. He called the university his last act of usefulness, and it was. But perhaps the most surprising chapter of Jefferson's twilight years came in the form of an old rival, John Adams. The two had once been friends, collaborators in the fight for independence, fellow signers of the Declaration. But over time, politics tore them apart. Jefferson became the standard-bearer of the Democratic Republicans. Adams led the Federalists. Their rivalry grew bitter. Their letters stopped. Their friendship died quietly in the ashes of election season. For over a decade, they didn't speak. But in 1812, a mutual friend, Dr. Benjamin Rush, encouraged them to reconcile. Jefferson wrote a tentative letter. Adams replied, and thus began one of the most remarkable correspondences in American history. Over the next 14 years, they exchanged more than 150 letters, not of apology, but of philosophy. They debated politics, theology, science, memory, and aging. They spoke of the revolution like two old soldiers comparing scars. They didn't always agree. In fact, they rarely did. But they listened. Their letters became a testament to the idea that reasoned dialogue could survive even the deepest divisions. Jefferson's health declined. His debts grew worse. He began selling off parts of his library and land. Monticello, always a dream more than a practical estate, slowly decayed around him. But in those final years, he regained something rare: peace. And an old friend, once lost to politics, became a companion in thought. They had both helped build a nation. And now, in the dusk of their lives, they were building something quieter: understanding. On the morning of July 4th, 1826, Thomas Jefferson lay in his bed at Monticello, too weak to rise, too proud to complain. He was 83 years old, frail, deeply in debt, and drifting in and out of consciousness. His family had gathered quietly around him. Outside, the nation he helped create was celebrating its 50th anniversary. Jefferson had always been fascinated by timing, by symbolism, and now history seemed to be conspiring in silence. As fireworks cracked in distant towns and parades began to gather in Virginia, Jefferson's breathing slowed. His mind wandered. According to those at his bedside, he stirred slightly and asked one final question. "Is it the 4th?" Told that it was, he closed his eyes again. He died a few hours later, just after noon. But the story doesn't end there. Hundreds of miles away in Quincy, Massachusetts, John Adams, Jefferson's old friend, enemy, and friend again, was also dying. The two men had not only rekindled a correspondence, but a strange and powerful synchronicity. They had walked parallel paths for nearly half a century, always orbiting one another. Adams, slipping in and out of lucidity, reportedly uttered his final words that same day. Thomas Jefferson survives. He didn't know that Jefferson had already passed, just 5 hours earlier. Two of America's founding fathers, two presidents, two signers of the Declaration of Independence, both dying on the same day, July 4th, 1826. The 50th anniversary of the nation they had helped forge. It was too poetic to believe, and yet entirely true. News of the twin deaths spread like wildfire. Mourning was mixed with awe. Newspapers framed it as divine providence, as if the founders had waited to ensure the Republic had endured for half a century before letting go. Jefferson was buried on his beloved mountaintop beneath a plain obelisk he designed himself. The inscription, at his request, did not mention the presidency. Instead, it read, "Author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia." He wanted to be remembered not for power, but for principle. And in death, as in life, Jefferson remained a man of ideas, flawed, brilliant, contradictory, and unforgettable. Thomas Jefferson left behind more than monuments, documents, or grand ideas. He left behind a debate, one that has lasted for nearly 2 centuries. To some, he remains the greatest of the founders, the mind behind America's birth, the philosopher-president who dreamed up a nation rooted in liberty. To others, he is a symbol of hypocrisy, a man who preached equality while owning human beings. Both views are true, and neither tells the full story alone. For generations, Jefferson was cast in marble, literally and figuratively. His words were carved into the walls of memorials. School children recited his sentences. Political leaders quoted him like scripture. He became a kind of secular prophet, his face etched onto coins and Mount Rushmore alike. But myths don't last forever. In recent decades, historians and the public have looked harder at the parts once left in shadow. The enslaved people at Monticello, his lifelong refusal to free most of them. The relationship with Sally Hemings, now widely accepted to have been one of unequal power, complicated by bondage and consent that could never truly exist. The Jefferson who wrote stirring lines about human rights also sold people to pay his debts. The man who envisioned an empire of liberty helped expand slavery across the American frontier. The thinker who championed freedom of religion sliced up his own Bible to remove the parts he couldn't accept. He was, perhaps, America's first great contradiction. But contradiction doesn't mean absence of greatness. It means complexity. Jefferson was a man who shaped the world with a pen, but couldn't fully reshape himself. He was forward-thinking in theory, often cautious in practice, bold in philosophy, yet hesitant in action, a master of elegant language who could sometimes hide hard truths beneath it. Today, Monticello tells a fuller story. The house is still there, but so are the names of the enslaved workers who built it. School textbooks now place Jefferson beside both his ideals and his failures, and the country he helped found continues to wrestle with the promises he wrote and the realities he lived. Jefferson's secret life was never really hidden. It was always in plain view, if anyone cared to look closely. And that, perhaps, is the lesson. A nation built on ideals must never stop questioning the men who wrote them, not to erase them, but to understand them fully and to do better.